Hello and welcome to Cloud Insiders, the podcast that brings cloud down to earth, brought to you by Extrovert. Today I have the absolute privilege. I'm joined by Joe Baguley and Andrew Gomarsall, who are just legends in the virtualization industry.
I'm not.
I'm
definitely not.
I'm not a legend
you can
either.
just stick to Joe.
We have Joe Baguley, CTO of VMware and legend in the virtualization space.
That's better.
And we have Andrew Gomarsall, MBE and former England rugby player and the director of N2S.
There you go.
Guys, if I could get a quick introduction from the both of you. If I start with Joe, how you've got here, what you're doing, and I mean, it's got to be quite a large story, one would imagine.
You say, how did I get here? Where do you want me to start?
Life stories.
Yeah, life stories. No, I've been in IT now I was trying to add it up the other day. I think I started in about 94, I think. So that's a long 25 years.
What was it called? It wasn't called IT,
No, it wasn't called IT, I don't think. But yeah, so I've been in this space since then, but various bits and pieces in the 90s. But the important bit, I suppose, is that I've worked for a growing software company now for over 20 years. I worked for Quest Software for the first half of this century, and for the second half so far this century I've worked now for VMware, and it's been really, really interesting and exciting sort of watching and working in a rapidly growing software company. And I've only in the last few years come to realize how special that is, because I meet a lot of other people that work in companies that aren't rapidly growing, and it's a very different environment to live in. So yeah, it's very exciting.
And Andrew, you've probably not come the most conventional route to working in IT?
No, completely not. But actually, I hold that as sometimes a bit of a strength, you know, not knowing the history too much and looking forward, because actually part of people's challenge in IT is the transformation. They just can't get their legacy to a virtualized or new world. They're so big. But obviously there's many ways to achieve that. But I sort of look at it as a fresh build. But no, I came blindly into this and literally knew what an Apple computer was. Well, the reason I love Apple is because that's what we did our video analysis through rugby on. The guy that did it all. You know, he used an Apple, and that's how I learned, you know, to use a laptop. Yeah. It was of this guy, you know, looking at video and, you know, researching all of our games and looking at the opposition, and all the strategy for the week was done through that. And
which at the time you thought was magical future stuff by fairies, right?
Yeah, completely. And you know, Clive Woodward was the first to bring technology into sport. And you know, he says that some of the forwards, once they realised, you know, what the internet was and what you could see on the internet, they really took to a laptop at that point, and they loved technology. But genuinely, I think there was one thing where I think we all have these ideas in business, and we sort of put our head down and we sort of go and focus on it. It's the same in sport. You sort of do your job, and you don't have the propensity to look up and see the opportunity. And he did that in technology. So I think we lost against a team, and we just said, look, there's no space. So he had this video analysis and this new software where it showed every position where you were on the pitch, almost like Sabutio, if you remember that game. And he did it. And literally I think it was against France, the whole of the French team were bunched in this little huddle like this, and we were spread across the pitch. And he said, you said there was no space, but look visually, you can see all the space. And we were just like, oh my God. So once we realized all of that, we really took to sort of technology. So it became a sort of bit of a fascination. You know, to be in it now is quite a fascinating time. And why I'm enjoying where I'm at is that it's still a sort of new part of the world of IT. I think sustainability is still, it's a major topic. It feels like a bit of a startup industry still right now. So that to what Joe's kind of been involved in and built those decades, you know, I'm sort of the start, I feel, of that next revolution, really.
Yeah, the green revolution.
Yeah, exactly.
Not to quote anyone particularly.
No. We'll take it. We'll coin it.
So we're talking today entirely about environmental factors. So as you mentioned, N2S is all into sustainability in IT. And of course, VMware have done ridiculously huge things for the environment through virtualization, and you've got several green initiatives. Today we've got you representing hardware and software, which is two sides of the coin. If we can start by bringing this down to software and the huge impact that virtualization has had on the world of IT and the world at large. How did the dawn of virtualization affect the environment?
To the stats, I mean, we've got a lot of stats so far, and actually it's we've avoided 640 million metric tons of CO2 through virtualization, which is the equivalent of, I think last time it was I think it's Austria and Switzerland and Spain, or sort of 3 or 4 European countries, their total emissions for a year is the equivalent that's saved through virtualization, which is phenomenal. And that's obviously by running, a lot less servers than people would need to, which is, clearly the thing. It's worth rewinding a bit in history. So back, it must be 15 years ago or more now, I was asked by a friend who I'd been at university with to help him out with some stuff we were doing at the British Computer Society, and we helped form the data center specialist group for the British Computer Society. We were the first people to sort of point out that data centers were important to the British Computer Society. Who would have thought it? And that was only 15 years ago. And actually what it was he was being driven by the fact that people were trying to sell, he worked for a company that built and operated large data centers, so people were coming trying to sell him equipment like, HVAC equipment, and say, here's some HVAC equipment, that will pay for itself in 18 months. And he was going, how do you prove that? How does that work? And so what we did was we then had to, so I asked me in, because I was quite good at the time at doing those kind of models, to start modeling data centers, to start modeling the energy usage in a data center. Because obviously if you want to work out with the HVAC, the air cod essentially, for those who are not using it, that's going to work and keep the thing cool and actually pay for itself, you have to model the energy usage and the energy efficiency of a data center. And during that, we got involved in, this is really interesting because, these data centers use a lot of power. And then we realized there were so many inefficiencies in the design of data centers, full stop. And so we then got involved in starting what became the European Code of Conduct for Data Centers. And so myself and other people in the committee, specifically Liam Newcomb and myself and a couple of others, wrote what became the best practices part of the EU Code of Conduct for Data Centers way back when. And it became a switch from, and bear in mind I was a guy who wouldn't really think about the environment. I drove a V8 Range Rover. I traded in an Audi S8 for, so I was hardly the most environmentally friendly person on the planet. And my friend who was involved was also a petrol head like me. And suddenly we were like, this is unbelievable. The amount of energy being used in these data centers is just outrageous. And the kit being used in them was just wrong. We had problems with non-linear power supplies. Now, this is a basic thing, but one worth understanding. A non-linear power supply means if you've got a server, and that server has a 350 watt power supply, typically a non-linear power supply, if the server has 0% load on it, will still be using about 280 watts. A linear power supply in a data center will be down to next to no power when the server's doing nothing and full power when the server's doing 100%. But back then, all the servers, it didn't actually make much difference realistically whether the server was doing anything or not. It was just the fact it was on, so it was that kind of thing. And then we're looking through the best practices, and actually we found one of the most effective best practices for virtualization, especially when you've got non-linear power supplies back in those days, but also now with linear power supplies, is to consolidate workloads onto fewer servers, which is where virtualization came in and all the sort of benefits of that. And so a lot of the technology we were doing back in the time was driven arguably around cost saving. It's cheaper to run on less servers. It's cheaper to turn your servers off at night because you're paying higher electricity bills. And in fact, once you've built a data center, the number one biggest cost of that data center is the power, right? And so ways to reduce that power were huge, and that's also paid off from an environmental perspective. So it's kind of been a win-win in that respect. Once we at VMware then started to realize that there was a benefit to the environment around virtualization, it was something, that's actually something we can drive down harder. And that's, I suppose, what we've been doing more recently and looking more effectively into how we can even better help the environment more than we have through technology using virtualization. So really, that's kind of driven the last few years of what we're doing. So the first part was like, wow, this is, doing it, I'm not going to say by accident, but by design. And it was then, okay, fine, how can we do more and more here? So, things you've got like DRS and other things that'll move workloads around and shut them down based on usage is really important.
Yeah.
I guess the return on investment was about finance,
yeah,
rather than the benefits of, by the way, you've just saved carbon emissions.
Totally.
No one thought about that.
15 years ago, no one cared about that, right?
Exactly,
there wasn't even carbon credit schemes, right? Which we then started talking about to people as part of the Code of Conduct, because I was going to people, if I went to you and said, actually, I'm going to halve the energy bill for your data center, you'd be like, yeah, tell me what to do next. How does that work? Or if I could then, with a proper financial model and a data model that actually looks, physically at what's going on in the data center, say, okay, well, if you did this, this, and this, bought these racks, did that, you'd be able to run 10 times the processing for 2/3 of the cost, and you suddenly go, okay, fine, that makes sense. So yeah, we did it then, and then actually the benefit has been around, the energy consumption being reduced. Obviously, then the secondary effect is you then look at what's the type of energy going to the data center, and there's a whole separate conversation to go on about that. And now the cloud providers have done a lot in that space. But I mean, a lot of people argue and look at cloud and go, well, cloud's really bad because these cloud providers are using all this power and energy. When in fact, actually, and Andy Jassy of AWS argues this quite well, that really, there's stuff going on in the cloud that would have been done on far bigger, uglier, less efficient servers in people's data centers. So it's actually, though that cloud might not be supplied by the greenest of power today, at least it's using less of that than it would have done over here. So, that's one sort of way of thinking about it.
Again, that's just the data coming back and attributing And that's where we come in, is that kind of decommissioning part is, what have we saved by turning this data center, turning it down, consolidating it, or literally closing it?
Yeah.
Nobody then goes, well, that's the benefit of doing that. They just kind of, it's always forward thinking.
Yeah.
There's no sort of retrospective look back and think. Some people do it very, very effectively and do it very well, but I think to sort of look at what you were discussing before, Joe, when you put together the proof of concept and you put it all together, is putting everything in, and then you get your return.
But there's an embodied carbon piece that people don't look into this, right? So or embedded carbon, depending on how you want to look at it, right? So once I've made a server, there's a certain amount of carbon and energy and effort that was gone into building that server. You can't ever get that back. So what you can do is you can make the most out of what you've done in putting that into it. So I think you may go, okay, fantastic, we've turned all this stuff off. But what about all the embedded carbon in that stuff? If you just take that and bin it, then actually you're doing a disservice to the planet to an extent. What you should be doing is saying, okay, well, if I can run this still efficiently to do something else in a more consolidated way, then maybe that should be repurposed. So maybe people shouldn't be buying brand new servers. What they should be doing is going, so actually, I don't need a brand new server to do this. What I need is maybe one that's 2 years old that will do the same job. And that's, again, where it comes to make a bit more sense.
I'm asking the question really, is that are you guys as consultants and software provider, are you doing the vendor's job in a lot of ways? There's plenty of groups now in data center world that are trying to really nail down what you just described. What is that carbon that the vendor has, that information.
Carbon,
yeah. And I don't think that that's ever been kind of publicly put out there.
No, we've not really done that. I mean, so
but you've been, all the stuff that you've been doing has been kind of brushing over the fact that point that you just made is nobody ever thought about that bit.
But we can only do, so I'm a software company, we can only do what we have power over to an extent, I suppose you want to look at it that way. So way back when, again, back in the BCS days, one of the predictions I made was I said at some point people would, because people don't care. When you write an application, do you care about how much energy it uses? Not really, no. But when you start to go to cloud-based billing and you start to then go to serverless and things like that where people bill you per line of code, then you might start to care about how efficient your code is. And way back when we started to look at this, we started to say people will start to write code or favor more efficient code because it costs less to run. And so, again, yes, when you go and look at cloud, what you're being exposed to is a majority energy cost of running what you want to do. So I think cloud has helped us in that way in exposing the energy cost of running that application. So we are now favoring hopefully more efficient applications because they cost less to run because they're using less resources. And again, it's that old billing model in any large old enterprise. You had the data center, which there was a department of people that just filled the data center with kit, and then there were other people came along and used the kit, and very rarely they tied the kit up to the user, and the costs were never borne through, and it was just we had this cost of the data center and whatever. And that was, again, what we found was when the number of people where the data center people weren't even seeing the electricity bill because that was dealt with another department, which was like the corporate power. So when this has all started to be tied together, and when you're providing a cloud service, you have to tie it together, otherwise you can't cost it properly. I think we're starting to see these models. So we actually came up with, it was a sort of skunkworks project amongst the C2 ambassadors, amongst VMware, this sort of carbon calculator that can look at your existing environment and work out how you could get efficiencies around what you're doing in your virtualized environment based on what you have. But again, it's not looking at it from a hardware perspective. It's looking at it from a pure sort of software and how much energy that hardware is using. It's an overhead. It's not looking at what's the embodied carbon of the kit that we're using and what's the life cycle of that and where does that go afterwards, which is I know where you play quite heavily is, making sure we get the absolute most out of that before we finally say, right, there's nothing I can do with that. And we and other things have made a massive difference in this space, but do you think they go far enough or not?
So the answer is no, but all the effort to do that, what is the benefit? And what we're trying to show is there is a benefit. So is that then attributed to the person that bought the kit to start with, offsetting their original carbon negativity? And so we're trying to say that reuse is a very healthy place to be. We're a service provider that reuses it elsewhere for another customer potentially, rather than them reusing it in their own infrastructure. It's how you attribute that, and there are ways of doing that, and that's what we're trying to create. Is almost a sustainability dashboard to say everything that you've got rid of has an implication for you positively to get you to net zero, which, is that a goal?
So you're almost giving credit back for people giving you old kit?
Completely.
Right, okay, because that's going to be reused through you as opposed to being thrown away.
Exactly.
So there's a whole system picture here, I suppose.
Correct.
Really. Okay.
Correct.
Right.
And it's the same with in the, we're in logistics as well. So there's forward and reverse logistics. Not too many people join the two together. The data from reverse logistics is just so retrospective, it never gets kind of joined up. And that's what we're trying to sort of achieve, really. There are companies with unbelievable consolidation programs. I mean, years and years. You think of the biggest service provider in the UK, their consolidation program for the next 15 years is absolutely massive. As a small business, as an SME, we are not, you'd have to have 10 to 20 companies like us to do the consolidation. That's how big it is. So we're all talking about the future and cloud and virtualization, and I'm looking at stuff of legacy going, it's still whirling around and it's still, so I always looked at a data center as a farmyard and it's a building, as a site.
Yeah.
And there are so many sites full of legacy infrastructure that's still whirling away and still being used. And it's absolutely core to people's businesses. You think of transport network and what a revolution we're going to be going through on the transport network is just crazy. And yet we're still using some of the old stuff. I mean, it's absolutely frightening. So my point being is that with this sustainability agenda, there is an absolute mass. So everyone's going, how are we going to get to net zero? There is a ton of things you can do to kind of offset it, and it's all to do with the consolidation piece.
Yeah.
But yet that's where the data is weak.
And we're trying to do the consolidation in software too, right? So we're trying to avoid that, and what we're trying to do is drive asset sweating, I suppose, if you want to look at it that way. There's this tendency in that we have this thing called fast fashion, right, in the real world, where it's horrendous for the environment, where you go to these shops where it's new clothes every week almost. Yeah. There's a fast fashion in technology as well. Or servers get to 3 years old, we refresh them. Servers get to 5 years old, we refresh them, or whatever. And sometimes it's almost like, why are we refreshing it? Well, because we always refresh at 3 years or 5 years. Like lease cars.
Yeah, completely.
And that made sense in the old non-virtualized world, because in the old non-virtualized world, you'd have Project X. You'd go and buy the service for Project X. You'd put the service Project X in a data center. Project X would work, and then maybe 5 years down the line, someone go, Project X is a bit flaky. Right, let's start Project Y. You'd get the new kit for Project Y, migrate from X to Y, and burn Project X. And that's basically how IT works forever, right? And it still works to this extent today. What we're looking at is thinking at the data center much more as one big computer. And so every element that you put into that is just adding into the pool of resources that are available to people to use, rather than being assigned specifically to one person. So that virtualization layer we put across the top of storage, compute, and networking means that there's a great benefit as a consumer, because what you're doing is you're saying, okay, well, every 3 months I'm going to put new kit into my data center. But the great thing is, because of virtualization, I can move all my most important stuff to run next day on the brand new faster processors or the faster storage, because it's just added to the pool. I'd have to change the apps. But what that means is the older stuff can start to shift left or shift right, depending which side you're standing at, and move further and further down the chain. So you might find that, yes, the old, less important stuff, the not so business critical, the overnight data analysis things, whatever, they're running on servers from 8 years ago or 7 years ago, at the very edge, to the point where, end of life starts to become a much longer story. But what we're doing by putting that layer of virtualization software across is we're smoothing that out. We're making it a lot easier for you to shift hardware around, as opposed to, as you well know, it's incredibly tied to a particular project, a particular, piece of infrastructure, that's to do with that. We're trying to say, no, let's just break all that down, and that's what, I suppose, private cloud, if there is such a thing, that's what it's all about. Yeah. And so it would be much more for, someone, there's no reason why someone couldn't inject, rather than brand new kit into that picture, they could inject some used kit into that picture that's just as good, And what you start to say is, okay, actually, because we've literally, a long word, disintermediated the apps from the hardware, you're not down to buying this particular vendor or this particular hardware or this particular thing. You can go, right, is it x86 or does it support 1 gig Ethernet? Great, fine. Let's bolt it in and add it to the pool. That's what we're trying to do. And so again, from a sustainability perspective, it might mean that you're not always out there buying brand new stuff. Yeah.
And you're right, we're a projectized business for that reason. But also it sounds like it's going to just be mainly a utility. There's going to be less of concern about exactly what, if it is brand new or versus it's a kind of second user, and it becomes a utility rather than just sexy, cool, brand new, latest, greatest thing.
When you go and rent your virtual machine from Amazon, do you know what server it's running on?
Completely.
Right? No, or any of the service providers. There's a limited few of them that you buy specific hardware, but in most cases you don't care whether it's 1 year old or 3 year old. Is it running fast enough? Does it meet the spec you want? Yeah. That's the answer, right?
Yeah. So Andrew, we've said with N2S you focus on the reusing of things, and you say that when you get something new, you could put something front and center and the old stuff slowly moves left and right. When something does become unusable, or sometimes things get shipped out to other countries, and essentially I think I was reading on your website, just put into landfill or set on fire.
Yeah.
What's N2S doing to kind of circumvent that?
Yeah, well, I think we've always come at it from a recycling. So our terminology, I think, is weak, and disposal, recycling, they kind of mean different things to different people. And that's where I think our terminology it needs refining. So disposal can mean reusing sometimes. We've disposed of it as a customer. Therefore, I've just kind of thinking in my brain it's gone into a bin, or actually it's being reused. So it's understanding that supply chain and actually what happens. The reality in all of this is, if you dispose of something as a client, do you understand what's happening next? Now, the market decides what's really happening, because our world is still driven by economics and value. So we've come at it from a recycling world where there's always a value. You break it down, and we do everything very old school by hand. So yes, we have machinery, but we still look after the product. So we want it disassembled, really meticulously into its component parts. And so we understand its lowest value, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, some of it is hazardous material and there is a cost to it. So when you're disposing, you're actually having to spend money to dispose of it, versus there's a value to it. So a server, we love servers because they're beautiful pieces of ingenuity in terms of when you break it down, how much wonderful material is in that product. Yeah. So, and that has a value, because in a sustainable world, actually, the reason it's so important now is we're running out of these materials to manufacture.
Yeah.
So for me, our raison d'etre at the moment on a macro is that loop. How are the vendors and the people that manufacture? So a huge supply chain. I mean, you're talking of all the vendors in the world, they've all got very disparate, very different supply chains to then manufacture again. There are vendors that are stipulating we will not manufacture with virgin material in the future. Now, there's no set date on that.
Yeah.
But the view is, from a sustainable message, is we can't keep drilling into the earth to get these materials, the gold, the platinum, the palladium, indium that goes into touchscreen technology. We can't keep, because actually we're running out. Yeah. It's harmful to the environment and we're running out. So my question and our raison d'etre is to kind of create that supply chain where we're looping back in the material that you manufactured 10 years ago. That material, how do we get it back into a form where you can remanufacture with the material? It's not like a carcass build or like a second user, take the coat off, and then you've got all the materials inside. No, we're talking about the whole of the whole minerals and materials. Yeah.
So
but the reuse element has always been there. Once we get a server into our building, there's a tipping point, and it's of a monetary value, and you just go, it's recycling. Yeah. Versus we're going to reuse this. And there's ways you can harvest it. So plenty of the vendors harvest the materials or the products within the server. Yeah. So they'll take this out and they'll take that out, and we separate everything. And they can reuse those elements. But realistically, I mean, lots of product lines as well. That's one of the other things. I mean, Cisco has 20,000 product lines, 20,000 different bits of equipment that has to be manufactured in a certain way.
There's an element to that where you're supporting old kit as well, right? So someone will phone you up and they're running a 10-year-old thingy and they can't actually buy the modules from the 10-year-old thingy anymore, but you've got one on the shelf.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Raiders of the Lost Ark. You see it, in we go, and there it's sat.
So that's the reuse bit.
That will always be the case. But, and this comes back to the history of myself coming into it quite blindly, is kind of the manufacturers need to make a decision on, are you going to really reuse? So HP are a great company that have a reuse department, and they've got some wonderful, but there's this kind of line of that's going against our sales teams that are selling new, and it's kind of like, I despair at that sort of narrative. It's just
how you drive the comp plans, though.
Yeah,
I'm intrigued on your recycling bit, though. So that really intrigues me. So I'm a judge in a thing called the Global Good Awards, which is about, if you want to summarize it, it's about profitable sustainability. Yep. A lot of sustainability costs, right? You have to spend to be sustainable. Yep. We all look at it. You want to put solar panels on your house. You want to put batteries on the side. It costs money.
Yep.
However, if we can make it such that the sustainable option is the cheaper option, then we win, right? Literally, we win. So in that prospect, how close do you think we are with some of these raw materials that it's cheaper to use the reclaimed raw materials than it is to use them remined? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I do,
that
absolutely.
tipping point.
Yeah.
What's your view on that?
I think the tipping point, if you think about the monopoly that was in the jewellery market, in diamonds.
Well, the invention of the price of a diamond.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, completely. So to kind of look at that line, and there is a tipping point where we're actually desperate now. We've run out. Just highlighting mobile devices. We're getting more and more
mobile phones.
We do, yeah. But not, we're not a major player, but we are starting to see a lot of mobile phones, and mobile phones definitely need to be reused. But then 5G's coming, and all of our phones, they're not 5G compatible. So suddenly there's a tipping point in the technology and kind of how it's run and what it's run, but also the material, us running out.
Yeah.
So that's the tipping point, rather than it being the cost part. We feel like we're a million miles away from that, actually. But actually what we should be doing is accelerating, going what's right for the environment, rather than the economics. The economics should work, and they will work.
They should follow faster, I think is the point, really.
Correct.
But that point should be that it must get to the point at some point where it's going to be, it's cheaper to buy unobtainium from you than it is to go and mine unobtainium out the ground.
Completely,
right?
yeah.
And that's where it should get to.
You can't even see us in this whole table here. You can't even see us at the moment in the grand
far too humble
companies. There. No, but it's true. But it is true that if you don't share it, the art of the possible, and I think it was Dell that was reusing plastics for a certain type of laptop. That was a start.
And Dell's also doing it for plastic. They're doing it with, they're using reclaimed ocean plastic for their packaging. So there's a whole bunch of stuff.
The supply chain is endless in terms of sustainability. That's what's so exciting once you start. But I would always go back to the actual hardware itself, because that's actually the potential inefficiency, and where the water that goes into garment, as well as making brand new, we've got a real water crisis coming, something's got to kind of change.
It's good that you talked about companies wanting to be, it's the right thing to do rather than the commercial. That for me is what sort of strikes home at VMware, is we quite often do a lot of, it's the right thing to do rather than it's just the commercially right thing to do. And that's we are tech.
It's not a share price decision. It's
a right thing to do, and the people that work for the company feel that we're doing the right thing when we do it. So a lot of the activities that we do are along those lines specifically. And I think we're seeing that across the board, actually. We're starting to see that, companies realizing that actually doing the right thing is just as important in terms of attracting customers as doing, the commercially most lucrative thing, should I say.
Yeah, I think the shift is, I said it in a couple of things that I've been speaking about, the shift really from the employee. So, fantastic brand that you guys have, and it oozes out sustainability, and then that helps the employees buy into it as well. Whereas I think there are some companies where the employees doing the opposite. They're trying to share with their own business about sustainability. And I think that was around Sky News and the oceans and the plastic and this whole, the blue planet. And it's just amazing seeing what bad we're doing to our environment is so visible now, across the board through the start of Sky News, that actually employees are starting to go to their own companies and saying, we can do something. We should be doing something, rather than, it's going to cost money. And
for us, it has to come from the top. For us, it's come from the top, the very top, and all of us in the senior management, believe in this as a company. You can see that just being here, right? It's not just about having electric car chargers in the car park. It's about the customers come to work and they feel that their mere act of coming to work isn't doing harm, and in fact, it's doing good. We hit last year our carbon neutral target. We've also hit our 100% renewable power supply target globally. So, it's those things mean a lot to the employees. When the celebration we have internally when those things happen is huge. But that's very important to how we do things at VMware, and we're looking to drive that in other ways that we behave. And I think the more we can get companies realizing that behaving ethically and in the right way, there's a whole bunch of other initiatives as well outside of sustainability, but specifically sustainability. With that, we have a strong belief in that. I mean, do you think that's something that runs through N2S? When you talk about we do sustainable thing, do you think the employees feel they're doing good in what they're doing in their job?
I mean, we're so visible. That's the thing.
Yeah,
we have warehouses full of equipment ready to be processed for either reuse or recycling. So it's so visible. And we have one client at the moment with over 6,000 pallets to get rid of, and they've had them for, let's just say, a decade.
Amazing.
I mean, it's staggering, and that's a series of their customers, and they're a logistics business, and it's quite scary once you start to ask the question.
Right.
Yeah.
So those 6,000
you pass them by on the M40 and the M1. You pass those big buildings.
Yeah, no, those
you don't know
buildings
what's in them.
those buildings are being heated. They're being lit. They're being built. just to house.
Maybe
stuff.
not these ones that we go to, but our staff understand because I saw the UN saying that 2020, decade for delivery, around UN sustainable goals.
Yes.
And I kind of like that because, you look forward, we always look forward. In our business, you have to look backwards a lot of the time. And a lot of companies, just by focusing on forward and focusing on new, they've done nothing for so long. We have a responsibility in poor marketing and not sharing exactly those best practices and what you should be doing. Also the guidance. So we had the WE directive. The WE directive was 2007.
That's really old.
I mean, we're 2020 now. So there's a lot of information that
you mentioned the UN SDGs there, and a lot of people don't know what the UN SDGs
are. Completely, yeah.
Right?
And so that's what they're saying is this is the year that part of the SDGs is sharing those, just from a education piece is tell your customers, tell your friends, there are 17 SDGs, tell them, and not everyone can do, VMware would tick a lot of those boxes.
We mainly focus on 9, which is the infrastructure one. So, but if you ask someone at VMware, they will tell you they know about the SDGs. They know that we mainly focus on SDG 9. I do a lot of work personally on SDG 9, but I'm surprised the number of people you go to and they see that little badge with the little 17 set and they have no idea, what's that? Is that gay pride? That's SDG.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fascinating.
It is. And so I think, this decade is kind of looking forward. I think, we've had the plastics kind of revolution of, you see it just consumer-wise and how wasteful we are and the oceans are full of plastic. And we've had that. And now I think there's going to be a sort of, being in a family business, my father's always dealt with metals, and that's, predominantly what makes IT. So, we've had the plastic, and yes, plastic is part of IT. But I think the revolution coming is around, recycling's always been the case in steel and, and copper and gold and, it's always been the case. But I think as we're making more and more devices, which we are, different kinds of devices, smaller, less probably needing the materials, but still hungry for certain different materials. This is an era and a revolution of how the hell do we reuse these? So we've got a cool new technology that's not harmful to the environment, basically separating, because we kind of glue it all together, don't we? And we solder it all, and then how do you reverse that? So we found a way to reverse that and separate those metals, completely unharmful to the environment. Basically, it's called bioleaching. It's happened in the mining industry. It exists today. So if you went home and looked it up, it exists. But nobody's really looking at it in a large scale in terms of returning the materials to how they once were. And
so how does that work? Go on,
it revolves around.
Give us the idiots going to bioleaching.
It revolves around the circuit boards. So that's where the gold is pretty much, is in the circuit boards. So it's separating the gold, the copper, the platinum, palladium. And what we've been doing with circuit boards for generations is burning it or using acids, which is
incredibly harmful.
Twice.
Lots of processes just to make the acid in the first place.
Completely. So you talked about, where's the tipping point? And I'm thinking these are major industries, big businesses. Even I know a vendor that went in to see how they extract the precious metals, and there was a door and they weren't allowed to go in that door, sort of thing. So you're kind of going, okay, so this industry, it's been incredible. It's had such positivity economic-wise. It's powerful because you're getting the materials back. You're trading gold and copper, and it's a big, big industry. But what are they doing to protect the environment? And that's the questions that's going to happen. But we found a way that it works for the environment, it works economically, and it's kind of perfect for the reverse of. And then you have this material, and where does it go? So it's a minefield of conversation with supply chain and manufacture and. But the point is that when you come to buy these devices, if a client, a consumer, business is looking at that and you support the goals, you want to buy something that has had, its due diligence of how it's been manufactured.
Right, so the provenance is important as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where the value is potentially going to be huge for the future.
So have you got a load of gold bars in your office then?
Not yet. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. But the amazing thing is you don't have to go and buy it. The feed is there.
Yeah.
It's massive. It's huge.
Yeah.
And when you actually open up a server, I mean, these things are just incredible bits of technology.
I'm thinking through what I've got in my garage now, stacked up that I could be making some money from there, definitely.
The interest van will be popping
Yeah,
by
just pop one
Marlow.
around and Marlow, you know where it is. Come and pick one up, yeah.
So, yeah, another world.
Do you see in the next kind of decade a lot of the stuff we've already sent to landfill in other countries we might end up buying back, or do you reckon?
Not really, no. I think they are literally dead and buried. There are mining of landfill sites there, but I think well, it's the jury's out, but I think those are buried for good, and certainly there won't be much metal in there. That is for sure. So there's enough of a problem. And then you think about batteries for the future with the new EV revolution. That will, again, we will have to have a form of environmental sustainable recycling of the batteries so that they can be reused.
That's an interesting point, that the battery recycling, this is the fun thing, so the battery recycling industry hasn't started yet, right? Because there's not the availability of batteries to recycle yet.
And they're going to last long.
And they're lasting longer than
10
people
years,
expect. Yeah. So all these EVs, people go, they only last 3 years and you have to spend £10,000. Rubbish. All these batteries in all these electric cars are lasting way too long, so long that there's not enough of them to start a sustainable recycling business in batteries yet.
Yeah.
It'll come in time, but I think when you look at that, that's a really good example of where reuse is being thought about from the start. So
Correct.
You put it in a car for 10 years, then you take it out of a car, and literally, integrally as it is, you bolt it to the side of a house, and then you use it to back up solar panels for another 10 or 15 years. And then, at the end of all that, the best thing about it is, literally 99.99% of the minerals in it, you can reclaim out of it to go and use again to build another one. They don't get used up. So whenever people talk about, sorry, I'm going to go on a small rant, but people talk about, lithium, there's not enough lithium. It's like, but the best thing about lithium is we only need to dig it up once.
Yeah.
Oil, we dig it up, burn it, and it's gone. Lithium, we dig it up once, and then we've got it forever. And we'll just keep using it. We don't throw it away in any way. We very carefully keep hold of it. And all the other stuff that's in those batteries, that's really important. I mean, it does get to this.
The quicker we can get to that, isn't it, really? The infrastructure needs to improve, but the quicker we can get to that, then we have a proper sustainable vertical, really.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And are you noticing, circling back to reuse over recycling, are you noticing any nervousness when it comes to people wanting to give up their hardware just out of a security breach point of view?
It's mainly because they're not sure what to do. So they just kind of hold on is the default.
Yeah.
There's an element of our job is to provide that managed piece.
But you can wipe the data and all that kind of stuff.
You can do all of that, So that's sort of, you can wipe it. You can do it yourself. You don't need somebody like us to do it. Yeah. Although people just kind of go, I don't want the admin, I don't want the pain, you do it. And so we will. And therefore we do it to reuse it. So we don't want to just shred it and destroy it. Working with somebody like DEFRA is really important to us because there's a big play on sustainable it was termed ICT, now it's just straight to IT because no one says ICT apparently anymore. So it's around the sustainable part of IT. We're working with them to stop something like incineration because plenty of government departments are saying we need to incinerate it. No, you don't.
Right.
It's harmful to the environment. You do not need. There is enough great software. There is machinery that destroys it to a certain level. No one's ever going to get that data. Why are we incinerating? And so we're trying to stop as part of a group. Yeah, we're trying to stop as a group just taking incineration out because it's just not
if someone comes to you, is a hard drive more valuable shredded or intact? Does it not matter to you?
No, it does matter. It's better to wipe it and reuse it, obviously for obvious reasons. So intact, and then commercially it's better in that regard.
Obviously,
there are companies that just have a zero tolerance. We will never reuse them just for fear of that overwrite hasn't properly worked and some data's leaked. So they will have a zero tolerance, and we will erase, destroy, shred, and we'll do all of those things. That's just part of the managed service, and whatever they want. You can steer somebody, you can advise somebody, but I think there's still that human visibility of I've seen it shredded, I know that it will never come back into play. And there is still a legacy of people that are zero tolerance to pretty open, whatever, I'm happy, you're using that software. But we want to reuse everything.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a clear plan, but demand is telling you reuse is effective rather than we're trying to drive it at the moment. the honesty is if it's worth money, then we'll reuse it. That's the crux of it.
Yeah. So playing devil's advocate a little bit when coming back down to this energy usage kind of situation, is it always best to hold on to your old stuff, or when we're in the land of hyperconverged and composable infrastructure, is it sometimes worth getting the biggest, brightest, newest from the perspective that'll eat a lot less power? Is it everything so much more efficient now?
I think the answer is you need to make an evaluation at that point. There's no yes or no to that, right? So there will be situations where when you look at both the embodied carbon in the manufacture of the device and then the ongoing running cost of that device, you actually find it's more expensive to the environment to do that than it would be to just keep running what you're running. At the same time, you've got to look at it on the flip side, is, okay, how much is, and that embedded carbon is actually exposed to you in the cost of the device, right? So does it cost me a lot of money to buy the hardware? That's one way to look at it, right? And so anyone's going to look at that. You know, if I spend £10,000 to save myself £5,000 on electricity, then obviously that's going to pay for itself in 2 years. That's a no-brainer. So you've got to look at it that way too. I don't think, you know, we've got to a point now with a lot of things where the optimization around energy has pretty much gone as far as it can in a lot of data centers that we go and see in terms of the new kit that's going in. They are linear power supplies. They are much better managed. They're much more efficient in everything that they do in every possible way, and that's just what's happened with the hardware. So, I'm not going to argue that, hyper-converged or composable infrastructure, you want compostable infrastructure is what you're looking for, really. But composable infrastructure and those kind of things, they're a great answer to actually making something last longer. So, so in that context, if I've got hyperconverged or composable, it fits much better into that model that I talked about before, where that thing could potentially exist for many years, having different types of workloads on it, because it's easier to reconfigure on the fly and reapply things to. It's not quite so job dedicated. So actually, I would say, if you're taking stuff that's already being used as universal virtualized hardware and replacing it with hyperconverged stuff, that might not have quite the benefit that you're expecting in terms of, carbon impact or energy impact. But yes, certainly, if you're taking something that's dedicated hardware or even if it's virtualized dedicated hardware and going to, universally available, throw it into the pool of resources hardware, then that's obviously going to be a benefit. And hyperconverged is the way that we're seeing people do that more than anything else, because it's the easy way to do it. Yeah. It's that Lego building block. You buy something that's got onboard storage, compute, and networking ports on it, and bang, that's your next building block. You just keep whacking them in, and they'll age over time. So. Yeah, it's not a yes and no answer to that question. There's a lot of variables involved.
Probably where the carbon calculator comes back into it.
Can help with some of that, yeah, definitely, yeah.
And you were saying about the electricity and servers, that's been the major cost of data centers. Does that ring true for all the cooling as well?
Yeah, so...
You kind of buy into the people putting their data centers in remote Scandinavian countries?
Totally, yeah, entirely. So when you look at a data center, the very crude metric that you look at is PUE, which is power usage effectiveness, which is essentially, if I take 1 unit of data in, how much of that, 1 unit of power in, how much of that power actually gets to the equipment, okay? And how much of it is taken up with the supporting functions around the equipment. There's an inverse of that, which is 1 over that. But basically, if you talk about PUE, you talk about, if I've got a PUE of 2, thereby what that means is I need to take in 2 units of electricity for every 1 unit that I actually use. Now that's pretty bad, really. What you want to get, obviously, is 1, which is perfect.
Perfection.
Right, perfection. Every unit I get in, but of course there's always going to be overheads of some form. Now those overheads typically are power and cooling. And the power and cooling overheads are exactly that. The stuff running the UPSs, the stuff running the transformers, and then the cooling to actually keep the data center running as it is. What you'll start to find is that you go, okay, fine, well, how do I start to reduce my PUE? Now here's the other interesting thing. You can't compare PUEs between facilities, right? Okay. Because that data center over there with a PUE of 2 might be better actually than a data center with a PUE over here of 1.5, okay? Because it depends what the compute itself is doing, what's it being used for, and also where's that power coming from and what type of power is it, okay? So you can have a PUE of less than 1. Oh, right. So how do you get a PUE of less than 1? How do you get a PUE of 0.8? Generate your own power. Yeah. It's that simple, right? So, or get to the point where you get to combined heat and power. Battersea Power Station is the way to think about this, right? So Battersea Power Station used to have active cooling, and the cooling that was used to use hot water pipes. Those hot water pipes were then delivered to heat the water in the local properties. So the houses around Battersea, so combined heat and power, it's called CHP. I've seen people where they've had data centers where the cooling pipes of the data centers are used to heat the municipal swimming pool for the council whose data center it is. So that's where you can start to get PUEs of less than 1. How do you lower your PUE drastically? Reduce your cooling requirements. How do you reduce your cooling requirements? Put your data centers somewhere cooler. Yeah. So yeah, go and build them up north. The ideal is to go and build them in Iceland, Why build them in Iceland? Well, because actually in Iceland you never actually actively need to cool the data center. You just use fresh air cooling, which is a posh way of saying open the window and put a fan in it, right? There's an element of dehumidification that has to go on to dry the air out a bit, because obviously these things don't like to run in completely, in high humidity. But at the same time, the power that you're pulling in from Iceland, entirely green. It's all hydro, it's all geothermal. You can't get greener than that. So actually from a carbon perspective, it's fabulous. From a PUE perspective, you can get stupidly low, even less than 1 PUE. It's really interesting where you can go with this. And there's really cool, interesting things. I've been on lots of data center tours as part of this job. I've seen adiabatic cooling, which is where you dribble it down a sheet and it evaporates. So it's essentially evaporative cooling. There's a whole bunch of new and exciting ways of doing this. But also there's been a change in the kit that we put in data centers. Now the interesting thing about data centers is that all the specs for putting kit in data centers we found back in the day when we started playing this game were written for, what temperature is a compute room normally, off the top of your head?
21 degrees.
21 degrees, why is that?
Ambient room temperature made everything work perfectly.
No, humans.
We like to be comfortable.
Correct. So old data centers used to have humans in them. The operators had to live in them. So what we did was we built all the kit to operate at human temperatures. Right? And so if you start to go now, we've got to dark data centers where you don't send humans in them very often, you can run your data center at 30 degrees centigrade, which means it needs a lot less cooling. Fantastic, right? Suddenly you've got far less requirements on cooling. Kit actually maybe runs a bit better at 30 degrees than it does whatever. There is a thermal breakover point with silicon, which is a whole separate podcast. But in essence, you can run your kit warmer. You can run it in humidity levels that are different because, again, those humidity specs were set around humans, not computers. So we're building on a set of standards for data centers that were based around people being in them, and people don't need to be in them anymore, right? So start thinking differently. And if you start thinking differently, you start thinking, okay, I don't need humans to be in there, I can run, forget hot and cold aisle separation, I'll just have the whole thing running at 30 degrees, or even I'll have the hot aisle will be at 45 degrees and the cold aisle will be at 25 or 30. That's the kind of thing. Then suddenly.
So are you seeing more and more, and they've got to be bigger? Is that right?
What, the number of data centers? Yeah, so we are seeing an increasing number. Look, people aren't destroying data centers. Yeah. There's no doubt about that. And I think this gets down to, yes, we're building data centers, we're building hotter data centers, interesting ways of doing it. Just to come back to the kit thing, I'll move on. My favorite thing was when we started to do this, we realized that there was a kind of a standard for front to back cooling for kits. You put it in a rack, sucks cold air in the front, puts it in the back. And in fact, we found that dribbling air past it rather than pumping it past it's better and all that kind of stuff. But certain manufacturers like to pull from right to left, which made no sense. But typically they were network manufacturers, because in the old telco world, you didn't pull front to back because the front had all the plugs and stuff on it. So you pulled left to right or right to left, depending on who you're buying it from. And so it was a nightmare. So now we've got to the point where things are actually standardizing at least on pulling front to back in racks. But that's another example of how you get efficiency in data centers. Amount of stuff, 100% agree. And I think that's where we need to start looking at what we're putting in the cloud and why. And maybe there's an ethical element to that. The horrendous one, and I'm not kidding, this is just horrible, is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is possibly the most morally wrong piece of software running we've got today, because basically the way that Bitcoin works is it works on proof of work. So you have to prove that you've done so much compute work to be able to essentially generate and then own parts of Bitcoins. It's a simple way, layman's way to explain it. No doubt there'll be a load of people in comments correcting me on that one. But just to give you an idea, right? One single transaction, so one Bitcoin transaction, uses 688 kilowatt hours. Now to put that into context, my house at home, if I don't plug my cars in, uses about 12 to 13 kilowatt hours a day. And they use 688. Wow. Even a US household, which is by far the worst in the world, that's enough to power one US household for 23 days for one Bitcoin transaction, right? The total carbon footprint of just Bitcoin, right, on an annualized basis is the same as the carbon footprint of Denmark as a whole country, right? For the price of doing one Bitcoin transaction, you can do 817,000 Visa transactions. So, to your point, yes, we're getting more data centers, but I think we need to start thinking a little bit more intelligently about what it is we're doing in those data centers and what we're using them for. Now, there's always an argument. When we started to look at this metric around data center usage, we started to look at this thing called useful work, because we were trying to work out, well, how much of that energy is actually being used on a processor to do stuff? Because obviously there's losses in the data. And then we got to this whole ethical dilemma of what's useful work. Now, you would not argue that obviously cancer research is useful work, but is hosting a particularly dodgy website, is that useful work? Might be by some people because it's generating revenue for someone to live, even though it's a dodgy. How do you look at that? And then there's the whole video conferencing versus flight, all these other things. And there's the mass weight is in favor of putting stuff in the cloud. There's no argument about a lot of things, but then there's always these outliers like the Bitcoins and the porn websites and other stuff that people come up and go, well, should we be doing that with this resource? Should we be using this limited resource that we have, in terms of all these things we're putting into making the cloud? Should we be doing that with it? So it's a good question to ask.
But also that we shouldn't be trying to navigate to where the tipping point is. That's frightening.
So we need to look at cheaper and more sustainable ways to store data. We need to look at cheaper and more sustainable ways to compute. The Apollo 11 podcast, you listened to that one? It's called 30 Minutes to the Moon or whatever. It was done by the BBC. Fascinating. One of the episodes, I think it's episode 4, is all about the computers used to get to the moon. Apollo changed our industry from men standing showing you how big their computer was, and they had the biggest computer, and it was whose computer filled the most rooms, to the Apollo mission was who could build the smallest computer, who could build the most efficient computer. And that drive, if we hadn't even had that step, I can't imagine what we'd be like today, right?
Imagine, yeah.
So, those kind of things. So I think we need to start again celebrating efficiency, celebrating sustainability, celebrating the fact that someone's done something in the best way as opposed to the fastest or biggest way, I think. And that's a cultural shift.
Yeah.
And that's something we've got to do.
So it's not going away, and it's not getting better.
No.
And the challenge and the problem's getting larger. I mean, that's pretty daunting, isn't it? And we're just talking about IT.
Well, yeah, estimates onto how much global energy goes into running data centers vary depending on who you read, between sort of 3 and 6 or 7%. But that's quite a lot.
Yeah.
And we didn't have any of that 30 years ago.
Yeah, I've got down here that ICT, which is apparently not the term anymore.
No, it's not the term. Do
you know why ICT was taken out? Because ICT was mocked wildly because schools used to have ICT.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was mocked by the industry because the people came out of this didn't have any skills. ICT essentially stood for I can type, because that was essentially what they were teaching them. That was what ICT training was: use Word, use PowerPoint, not actually that. So I think they stopped calling it ICT and just call it IT. So.
Fair one. So I've got down here that the IT industry accounts for about 3.6% of overall carbon emissions, and that 45% of that 3.6 is actually data centers.
Yeah.
So that's forgetting all other aspects, manufacture, everything. It's
big challenge.
That's something to think about. And I don't think people do think about it. In terms of the impact of what they do. And I think you'll see more of this. I was invited onto a radio show recently and onto a sustainability show. And, I went in there to talk about all the stuff I do with my cars and batteries and solar panels. But actually, we started getting onto software because they asked what I did for a job. And the presenters were stunned because they'd never actually understood all the stuff that goes on in data centers.
Yeah.
And when I started talking about the stats to do with Bitcoin, they were horrified. And then when I started to say, well, have you thought about how much energy is used every time you stream a YouTube video? You thought about that? Have you thought about maybe using a search engine like Ecosia, which uses its revenue to plant trees as opposed to do other things? Those kind of things, I think we're just starting to get to the point where people are realizing the impact of their consumption in that context.
It's funny you mention that because, of course, Coldplay has said we're not going to tour anymore because of the price of aviation and the sustainability of it.
Oh, yeah.
You don't see them having any issue being on Twitter, Facebook, anything like that, when if you've got a following that huge, that's going to have a huge footprint behind it.
Could do, but I think you'd argue that that's probably better than the alternative, which is getting on a plane. And we look at, again at VMware, we offset our travel, obviously, but at the same time, we realize that's not the answer in any way, shape or form. It's a nice thing to do, and it's the responsible thing to do, and planting trees, etc., to offset it. But actually, what we should be doing is just not doing it at all. So we're actively looking in every possible way and starting a culture of non-travel. So I certainly fly to America a lot less than I used to, which is also very nice.
Do you think virtual will be the answer?
Virtual's always the answer. Always the answer. You know that.
So you've mentioned a lot less travel and the planting of trees. What are VMware doing beyond their commercial offerings to improve the environment?
There's a whole host of stuff. I've already talked about the general things that we're doing in terms of the SDG 9 goals, but yes, planting trees, yes, all the other things that I talked about, 100% carbon neutral, 100% renewable energy in terms of what we're doing here, actively promoting where we can sustainable travel. You'll see here at the office that we're sat in right now, we're actively promoting with free car charging and other ways that we support people in getting into more sustainable travel mechanisms, cutting down less travel, just generally trying to do less travel as we do it. But I think there's more. So what we're doing at our site in Palo Alto, which is our head office, we have solar generation there, but also we have stuff with water reclamation, a whole bunch of other different things. What we're doing there is we're literally going to build that to be entirely off-grid.
Okay.
So it'll be entirely self-sufficient in terms of what we're doing on our site. But what we've realized is in doing that, we can go beyond that and we can start to supply locally. So we'll actually be positive in what we're doing entirely sustainably. But then the more fun thing is, well, it's not fun, but actually our head office there is also a disaster recovery site in California. It's, one of the buildings, Hilltop, is covered with radios because it's, when all else has failed and apocalypse has come, that's where they're going to come and operate the radio stations from. But in a place where there's earthquakes and fires, etc., a lot. So we're also going to be a support hub where we'll provide power and water essentially in the event of emergencies. And so we're looking to see how we can do that, and then we're looking how we can start to take similar actions in other places around the world as well, and encouraging companies. So there is no limit to what we're empowering our employees to suggest we try and do in terms of changing how we act sustainably. And little things like going down to marketing and saying, can you stop buying plastic things to hand out to people? Can we find other ways to do that? Yeah. If you visit our briefing center downstairs, we try to do a lot of our briefings virtually over Zoom, but actually we still have things where people come into the site. But if you come to the site, everyone who comes here, the name badge that they get actually has a seed in it. You go and take that away and plant it. And we encourage everyone who comes to plant a tree to remember their time at the VMware briefing center. And I'm not sure that everyone's going to sit there in 30 years' time and go, I can remember my 4-hour meeting in Staines. But at least it's something, and so we, it's every little way we can find some small way of doing something that's positive in that way. VMworld is huge for us. Obviously, VMworld is a big conference. Conferences, incredibly huge environmental impact, obviously all the people flying in, so we offset all of that for a start. But at the same time, we look at how we can be more sustainable each time, better in what we're doing at VMworld. So you don't all get magic free gifts. You can get free gifts if you want to, but we give people the option to say, no, you don't have to take the bag, you don't have to take the jacket, you don't have to take whatever. We look at what we're doing with the food, we look at what we're doing with the, literally down to the cutlery. We had no plastic bottles this year, for example, and all those things are things that cost to do. They cost time, they cost money, but no one argues them because we know it's the right thing to do. Yeah. That's the important thing, and that's what I'd probably, I'm most enthusiastic about working here for this company, is that that's what we do. It's just normal. Yeah. If someone said, let's do the most sustainable thing, no one's going to sit in the meeting and go, that might cost. Everyone says, yeah, okay, fine, next one.
So what we're taking away from that message, if Coldplay does want somewhere to play VMworld next year, they're very much welcome and they will be offset. So
yeah, we will. We'll make sure we get them there in a sustainable way.
Perfect.
That's incredible.
And
look forward to that gig in Palo Alto.
And for a company that's listening now and just thinking, I'm absolutely inspired by this, I need to change the way that our company works right now, what are the key initiatives that you would say just every company needs to take on right now, no questions asked?
I think you've got to, if you're inspired by listening to what we talked about, that's the first thing. And definitely, that's a good start. I think you've got to want to do it. Okay, I think doing it for the purposes of virtue signaling or CSR, corporate social, that's just wrong. Okay, it's like buying an electric car because you think it's the right thing to do so you can drive it and feel smug, but actually you're doing 100 million and one other things. You've got to want to do it for the right reasons. I think once you then realize that as a company, doing the right thing by sustainability, doing the right thing by the environment, doing the right thing by the planet, I suppose, is it's incredibly inspiring and uplifting for the company and for the employees. You'll find it helps with retention. You'll find people actually want to come and work for your company because of, I've got graduates queuing up because of the image of the company, because they know they can make a difference. Those are the kind of things that matter. People talk about skills gaps, they talk about retention problems, they talk about staff. But it comes down to one very simple thing. It's like literally the ability to wake up in the morning and sit there and know that what you're doing is doing something at least that's negative, that's neutral impact to the planet, and if anything, slightly positive, right? And then you can personally, not so you can go and tell everyone at parties that you're really cool and amazing, but that literally that you and yourself can feel happy about that. And so when you're looking at other companies, how do you do that, right? Well, obviously you can't change your own company overnight. It's not going to happen, but you can start initiatives, and there's long lists of those how you do that. But start in how you're procuring stuff. Right? That company you talk to next, ask them what their sustainability stance is.
Correct.
Ask them for their cloud. Is it renewable? What's the carbon impact of me using your cloud? If I come and buy computers from you, how are you going to ship those computers to me? Where do those computers come from? What's your company's sustainability? How are you tying? Start questioning your supply chain. Start driving down and saying, are we being as sustainable as possible in our supply chain? Because that's how you'll affect change. Because what you're actually doing then is you are using your money to change other people. And that's what you do, right? The only way you'll affect, people often come to me and say, can you change this? Can you change that? It's like, well, actually, I'm not giving that person any money, so they're not going to listen to me. But if you're choosing whether you give someone their money or someone else their money based on that decision criteria, worlds will change. And I think that's what's happening. Some of that has happened through regulation. Some of that has happened through, various statutory law that's being put in, but ultimately people have to want and will to change. You see it happen, right? People are stopping buying plastic, things in plastic bottles. People, but we had to start forcing people to stop using plastic bags, which arguably hasn't really worked. But, there's all those things, there's different bits and pieces, but you have to chase it in your actions.
Agreed, wholeheartedly.
So I think we're going to have to edge towards wrapping this up. Is there anything you guys would like to add? I mean, it's been hugely insightful and I'm not going to lie, pretty scary, listening to the way the world is going to
it is. And when you look at the kind of sustainability right now at the top, you look at the US and, Trump, and he was just like so anti. And then you've got this little girl, Greta, who's just pretty much punched him in the stomach. With the reality. And what Joe was saying earlier about the grads, this next generation, don't care about your share price.
Yeah.
They want to work for somebody who is thoughtful to the environment, number one, and has an agenda, and they'll be bringing it if it's not there. But if you want to recruit people in the future, this is a standard.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not even, we're flashy because we do this. It's a standard. They will just see it as the norm. I think it's a definite revolution, and I'm a hypocrite to a certain degree. I've got a plastic bottle just sat here because I was disorganised. It was in my kit bag, and I didn't bring that bag. My point being is, if you don't try, and it's not, we're going to solve it overnight. Just like in life, you just go, that's the first problem I'm going to fix. Let's do that. Then the next. Then the next. If you don't talk about it, plan it, and actually execute. And it does come from leadership. I see a whole ton. Talk about sport. I do pitches on sport and leadership. I see in business a lack of leadership.
Right.
Plenty of people doing stuff, but nobody making any decisions. And what sustainability is about making a decision, so leadership, and then executing on it. And that's the difference, really. We can fluff around it and talk about it, and it's all this has got to happen, but you need to see those, outcomes.
Yeah,
I think we realise that you're not going to get there in one step, right? You're not going to get there in 10 steps. But what you've got to do is just make sure that every step you take is going in the right direction. That's the simple point. And the other thing, I think, we hear this stuff, that you'll hear all this marketing around save the planet, right? I'm a physicist, scientist, however you want to describe me. So I take a slightly longer view on things, and I agree with Brian Cox. The planet will still be here. It's all the life on it that will go. How fast do you want that cycle to accelerate? You only have to look at somewhere like Australia right now. That's why it's important to me that I know that I'm doing as much as I possibly can in my personal life and in my professional life for me to be able to hold my own head up high at myself when I look in the mirror. Not anyone else, granted to my children, but actually, when I look at the mirror myself, I know that I've done the best I can at the moment.
So long way to go, exciting. I think we're all trying to reflect is that, sustainability, sat down with DEFRA and somebody sort of said, can we just redefine what sustainability means? I'm like, wow, we're still at this point. It was a good point, and it was very valid, right? As a group, we need to work out what we saying sustainability is.
Yeah.
But I was still a bit horrified, thinking, God, are we at this point, like writing it down at the start? It will, if it makes sense to the environment, it will be economically better off. And then, just the social impact, the whole loop, it ticks all the boxes. So crack on. Or you're going to miss out.
So on that apocalyptic, but I think positive note, I
Yes.
think we should probably wrap up. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. It's
Welcome.
been absolutely brilliant. If anyone would like to reach out to you, what's the best method? Have you all got Twitters? And
we're both on Twitter.
Twitter and LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn.
So what would be your handles?
What does that mean?
What's your username on Twitter?
My handles is a grifter or a BMX. At Andy Gomarsall, it's very simple.
Yeah. And I'm at Joe Baguley, if you can spell it.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. And if you want to follow Cloud Insiders, you can find us on Twitter at Cloud Insiders, and you can also find us on LinkedIn. All episodes are available on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcast, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. And you can also get them all at cloudinsiders.fm. If you'd like to reach out to us or have any ideas for future episodes, you can email team@cloudinsiders.fm. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, and until next time, goodbye.